All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to HI's third Congressional Bootcamp on Artificial Intelligence. This year marks a significant milestone for HAI. It was just 2 months ago at this very auditorium where we celebrated our 5th-year anniversary. Since our inception, public policy has been an integral part of our mission. As we stand at the intersection of unprecedented technological progress and societal needs, the role of thoughtful and informed policy in shaping the future of AI cannot be overstated. This is why we created the bootcamp program 3 years ago, continuing the tradition of Stanford hosting congressional bootcamp over the past decade. This year, we're honored to host a cohort of 26 bipartisan and bicameral congressional staff for an intensive 3-day training on AI, featuring insights from the HI and Stanford communities. Over the course of this bootcamp, we have designed a comprehensive agenda to ensure a deep and multidisciplinary understanding of the technology. On the first day, we lay out the solid foundation to explore the fundamentals of AI, including core concepts, the role of data and compute, and the safety considerations. Earlier today, we delved into various applications, including in healthcare, education, future of work, and the public sector. And tomorrow, on our final day, we'll focus on governance, addressing crucial topics such as sustainability, synthetic media, copyrights, privacy, and international security. And now we arrive at our widely attended event where we will discuss the role of industry and how it is shaping AI. It is no secret that industry plays a dominant role in AI research and development. This influence brings both significant opportunities and substantial responsibilities. The session will delve into the crucial understanding of the dynamics between industry initiatives and public interest, helping us navigate the complexity of AI governance and responsible advancement. With that, I'd like to introduce the panelists for the session. We'll start with Dr. Rachel Gillum, who is the Vice President of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology at Salesforce. And Sarah Guo is the founder and managing partner of Conviction, a venture capital firm founded in 2022 to invest in intelligent software. Michael Kratsios is the former Chief Technology Officer of the United States. He is currently the Managing Director of ScaleAI, and we're lucky to have him at HAI as a Distinguished Policy Fellow. Navrina Singh is the CEO and founder at Credo AI and a member of the U.S. National AI Advisory Committee. Last but not least, our moderator for the session today, DJ Patel, who has held various senior roles in industry, academia, and government. He is the former Chief Data Scientist of the United States and a general partner at Great Point Ventures. All right, DJ, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. What a phenomenal crew we have here, especially in this time and era of AI. And so maybe to kick things off is 2023, kind of AI takes everything by storm. It's kind of transforming everything. Suddenly, grandmas to kids, they all know AI. Everyone's playing with the tools. 2024, what is 2024 for you with regards to AI? Are we hitting the valley of despair? Are we still, super optimistic? Are we rethinking our position? Why don't we just go down the line?
Yeah, no, happy to jump in. So I'm obviously coming from, the big enterprise space, thinking about AI use and all that stuff. So, a lot of conversation about, is this slowing down? Is this a bubble? Well, not commenting from the Wall Street, but inside the company, I think we're really just still at the very beginning of really driving those integrations and innovations, building the AI into the systems and features and products that our customers already use. So I think we're at the very beginning of that cycle to start to really see that value and that impact in the business space. So I think there's still a lot to come in 2024 and beyond there. I think we're just scratching the surface there. And I think, on the flip side of that, as we continue to innovate, we've started, particularly in 2024, seeing a lot of coalescing around rules and regulations. We've seen a lot of momentum in that space from the EU, US, UK, UN, OECD, like you name it, right? Starting to see some themes around, risk-based approaches, focus on privacy, which I think is really important, some really interesting conversations. So I think that will be interesting to watch moving forward as well.
So, thank you, Sarah. How about take us in the direction of what you see specifically, because If you don't know about Sarah's podcast, you should be listening to it because it's one of the most insightful places to get your sense of what's actually happening with the day-to-day of AI. But also, you're the one that I think of the most who's actually spending time with students who are building things, trying to innovate, new founders. And so what are you seeing in the shift between 2023 and 2024?
Yeah, I think the release of ChatGPT in late in 2022 was kind of the starting gun for innovation in that besides a niche group of academics and a small number of researchers and technologists at some of the larger tech companies, like not a lot of people were paying attention to sort of the ongoing research field in AI. And this was like the first sign of life that you might have much more general, more powerful capabilities coming. And so I think that there is diffusion of innovation in talent bases, interested in innovation, entrepreneurship, academia, big company investment, just like there is from customers, right? And so over 2023, like at the beginning of 2023, I was going around to like some of my friends from public companies and doing presentations to boards about how they should like care about AI and like get ahead of it. I don't think anybody needs to be told that now. I think people think it is a really large technology change. But you had a lot of experimentation throughout 2023 with models that are the weakest we will ever see them be, right? And so, as Richard was saying, I think we're very early in the capability set. We have people who are entrepreneurs and technologists that are being very creative with a set of models that had very little tooling, are not as intelligent as they will be next year, didn't have guardrails, didn't have a set of best practices around them, and still they produce things that were like interesting and pretty useful. Still quite early for the enterprise, but I think we're like halfway through the first inning of this.
Where's the vibe of the CFO and CEOs of these big enterprises? Are they still massively bullish? Are they like, hey, where's the value proposition? Or are they, what's it like?
I think it is hard to run a public company in general because you were, and I'm not like a late stage public markets investor, I'm an early stage investor in general, but my sense is very quickly you went from nobody caring about what was going on in AI around somebody's stock price to, in order to be an innovative company, you had to have an AI strategy, to the backlash immediately of like, we're talking about like 3 quarters in a row, right? Like nobody cares, you'd have to do AI, and then like where's the return? And unfortunately, as everybody here knows, it actually takes quite a long period of time to go make investments in technology and then reap the benefits when there's change management in not just individual workflows but entire organizations, right? And so I think I think that there's been a huge amount of venture and general capital markets investment in the first set of companies. I think everybody looks at the explosion of like NVIDIA market cap and a couple other major players and says, I want a piece of that. But I do think it's very possible that we hit an air pocket where CEOs and CFOs that are not named Mark, like they are forced to justify whether or not this big investment is worthwhile. And I've made a very large career about that. This is going to be the most important technology shift we'll see in our lifetimes. But what's the truism? Like people tend to overestimate what you can get done in 3 years and underestimate what you can get done in 10.
Okay. Michael, you led these efforts and really the push for the United States, really thinking about AI from the White House as well as the Department of Defense. You've got this unique lens of watching this arc take place pre-2023 into this and also being at scale now as a startup. Would love your perspective on this journey that we've been on so far and what this year looks like to you.
Yeah, I see a lot of parallels in the policy world with sort of industry broadly and where the commercial sector is going. And I think similar to what you were mentioning, I think it all kind of started when ChatGPT came out and everyone got super excited. And you kind of, pre that point, anyone in the policy world who cared about artificial intelligence was usually in a corner, banging a drum, trying to get someone to listen to them, screaming into the wind. And when you finally, either got it mentioned in the budget or you got a small piece of legislation passed, it was like a big accomplishment. And I think in some cases there was some of that kind of in the commercial sector where you had some small AI players that were trying to make a lot of noise, but it wasn't sort of seen as like dramatically transformational. Then sort of ChatGPT happened, and sort of you take that parallel in the policy world, there was an extreme amount of attention that this particular technology grabbed in Washington. There were hearings left and right. People were writing op-eds everywhere. There were talks about creating global sort of regulatory regimes. And there was this like massive sort of like hype and build of all these different ideas about what we should do about the technology. And I think that, again, that parallel was seen in industry where everyone suddenly believed that this was a technology that was going to transform everything and anything, and everyone had to have a strategy, and we immediately need to start working on stuff. And I think kind of what we've seen in 24 is kind of a level setting, both in the policy world and in the commercial world, of sort of how this technology is actually going to be sort of impacting the day-to-day. In the policy world, I think all of you are probably even more familiar than I am. The amount of legislation that's being moved around AI is pretty minimal. The efforts by the sort of executive branch to take action have been, very much focused on sort of the protect side of the equation, export controls, that kind of thing. And then on the commercial side, you're seeing people excited about technology, but realizing that it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of hand-holding to get any of these models into production. So I think reality is kind of setting in, and in some ways I think that's like a good thing for both the policy side and the commercial side, where we've kind of like burned off some of that hype, and we can think a little more critically about where are the places that we can make the biggest impact.
Mm-hmm. Ravina, CEO and a founder, so you're living this on the other side of actually trying to make this happen while also playing a foot in the policy world. What's it like from your vantage point as the CEO, founder, making sales as well as trying to recruit and all the other things that come along with the challenges of being in the big role?
No, absolutely. And it's interesting because the startup I have, which is called ScaleAI, is a very different startup than what you are hearing in especially in the generative AI space with large language models and foundation model providers. We are a startup that's focused on governance. So what we do is we provide you a software that provides oversight and accountability of these AI systems. So as you can imagine, the hype that we are seeing in the generative AI space, we've seen, especially with the customers we serve in Global 2000s, they're going from this wow stage to now the how stage. Is this generative AI actually going to, one, get them the benefits, but secondly, to put any of these large language models in production at scale, serving their customers, they need to have the right guardrails because there's a lot at stake. So DJ, what we are seeing, especially the governance space that ScaleAI operates in, is one, there's a little bit more, I would say, going in with eyes wide open. We are still moving from experimentation to the reality setting stage. So question is, what are the kind of capabilities we need from tooling perspective? What are the kind of capabilities we need from people perspective? What is the change management needed to really bring in that responsibility mindset into the business? That's one big shift that we are seeing happen in these enterprises. The second big shift is really showing up on the right policy tables, because I think there's an understanding with AI and not only the complexity, but the scale of this technology. Most of the global enterprises really need to understand the regulatory space much more better. So there's a public-private partnership, I would say, much more actively happening within the enterprises that we are working with, which has been great to see, but also I would say there's a lot more work that needs to happen there. And then the third thing that we are seeing is, especially if you think about the startup ecosystem, and I know Sarah can speak more to it, but especially if you are the innovators, you are just going full force trying to figure out, is there the differentiation? Do they have the right moats? Is there actually the ROI that these new AI startups can actually bring to bear? But on the flip side, the enterprises are really taking a pause and thinking about, do we have the right set of structures to make this happen at scale? So we are right at the middle, DJ, in one, operationalizing policy. We operationalize standards and regulations so that we can bring that oversight to AI systems. But on the other side, we are seeing that AI is the core priority in enterprises. It is a board-level priority. There's a lot of now relationship that's getting established with DC. So we are seeing a lot of executives actually show up to DC to really have these conversations at scale.
Rachel, coming back to you on this dimension, you're at Salesforce, giant company. How do you create alignment around these issues inside an organization? Because I think a lot of times we think, oh, somebody just says something at the top from a CEO perspective, and there it happens. But it's oftentimes like government, very messy. Yeah. It's complex. You've got lots of different incentive functions, different goals, regulatory aspects. From where you sit inside this organization, what are the things that you wish that others would know as if they're in similar roles to be effective?
That's a great question. So I guess just to take a step back, my role, I'm in the Office of Ethical and Humane Use, and so we're really the team really driving that responsible AI from development. We're testing the models, we're setting the frameworks for sort of what they should and should be able to do, testing the integrations within the product, and then setting the policies for our customers and how they can use it, and really overseeing that governance process, to your point. So in our case, we've been doing this for several years now, so even before the generative AI craze, if you will, thinking about different types of technology and even predictive AI. And it actually did initiate from the top, Mark Benioff really saying, like, there's a variety of issues where sort of tech and society, there's this tension. Like, these are really hard questions to grapple with. So we actually did form our office about 5 years ago, and have been driving it from there. An important institution with our office is our Ethical Use Advisory Council. So we think it's really important to bring a variety of perspectives, from around the world, really, human rights experts, tech ethicists, to the table alongside of our executives as we sort of grapple with not only the rules we want to set, then we need to then go execute. So our office is
and what's that like? You get these rules, you go to show up to the tech team.
Yeah.
Are they like, what is this? Or are they like, oh, thank goodness, clarity?
No, that's fair. So getting more to the nitty gritty if I was talking to someone in another company. So even from the top, you still need to, there's so much pressure on companies to ship the product, get it out. There's a race, there's a pressure from the board, right? You need to get these products out there. And so we've had to be really strategic in really getting in early with different product teams, with engineers, and understanding their process and help them think through some of the risks and understand what they're trying to build and how we can really put in those guardrails from the beginning. I think that's the key. You never want to be at the end of that process, basically putting a stop or slowing, the delivery cycle. So we've established a governance mechanism internally so that we have top execs aligned for sort of like, what are our standards, what needs to happen before something goes out the door. So it's been a lot of, that people working, because there's still that pressure, immense pressure for companies to really move fast and to innovate quickly.
Right. Sarah, I want to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about, what are the key assets that innovators need these days? So I think of this a little bit like a Maslow's hierarchy, like food, clothing, water, shelter, for AI. And these are like, to think about, these are the things, like, if we cut those off, we potentially limit innovation, or we could potentially shape it in the right way. What do you hear? And what's going on in my mind is I'm thinking about all these young people who are building, and are they engaged in any of these conversations? Are they listening to policy land? Are they listening to DC? Or are they just like, hey, I'm trying to build and go, go, go? What is the things that are on their mind that they need to have to continue the engine of innovation?
I don't want to jump our conversation forward into another topic you wanted to talk about, DJ, but
that's okay. It's like Marvel Universe with different time paths.
Okay,
like
all right. Time warp, right?
And
I think it's something people would be interested in anyway. Like, if you are a Stanford PhD student who is responsible for some of the most important innovations in robotics over the last few years, or Stanford professor working on embeddings models, which are like how you represent your data to one of these generative models, these LLMs, instead of just saying like pull anything from the internet, it's pull it from my data and my database. You are not thinking about policy and the regulatory concerns unless it is a like critical impediment to your progress.
Like you're in healthcare.
Right.
Or something like that.
Right. And so, and I mean, the last company we just invested in was a company that automates like a piece of healthcare administration, right? So if you want to justify to an insurer why you are prescribing this expensive cancer drug, you need to have gone through a certain process of treatment for that patient to date. We have human techs do that today. What they're doing is extracting information and reasoning against it from the EHR, right? And so where you have existing regulation around, for example, patient safety or data security, then you think about this as a company, right? It's specific to your domain. Otherwise, I think like the only thing you're trying to figure out is there any value here? The reason I said like we might be time warping to the future of DJ's conversation is for anyone who is working on model development, in particular open source model development, it's a very different equation, right? Because now you think about liability for what anybody could possibly do in the future with the models that you create. And it creates a very different burden and one that I think is actually like a huge dampening effect on innovation.
Okay. So to just kind of go back to, if you think of the top 3 things that the cohort of people who are the young builders, or the young being really just out of college, like early in their career is
There's
what
a whole range of ages, but
right.
sure.
But I'm thinking like early in their career where they haven't had a lot of experience in the job world. What are the 3 things that they are really saying like, hey, this is the fuel for me?
Yeah. I think in some set of companies, like compute is a big need in a way it hasn't been. Like entrepreneurs have had it easy in the software landscape for the last decade or so, courtesy of Google and Amazon. Whatever society's other issues with these companies might be, the like necessary starting capital to create an interesting software company has gone from quite expensive to almost zero. And I think that's generally a great thing for the American economy. We are now in a very different place in AI land, right? If you want to train and fine-tune models and manipulate them, you often need a pretty serious amount of specialized compute in terms of GPUs. I'm sure you guys have been talking about this. And that makes it a more expensive proposition again. So I'd say like, if we just separate it from the past, I think that's one thing that entrepreneurs now need. I think the other is, this is not something that like the ecosystem can give them at all, but machine learning products are experimental. DJ knows this, right? I think, and I'm sure you're trying to help enterprises understand this as well. People buy data from Scale to try to get around this, or to try to work on this problem. But we have a concept in our firm called minimum viable quality, right? If you have a machine learning product, it's not deterministic. And so some of the time it works. And I think it's a reasonable view that if it works 99.999999% of the time, well, that's probably actually better than the process you had before. And so I don't think this is a blocker to people adopting machine learning products, but the beginning phase of starting one of these companies tends to be more experimental and more research-driven than many companies, 5 years ago, because you're just trying to figure out, like, is the product going to be good enough? It's not sort of, you work in traditional enterprise software, and you're like, okay, if I just cover this workflow, it's really a question of like grind, right? I produce the software and I get it to the customer, and if my understanding of what they were trying to do was correct, like it is useful. In AI land, you're like, well, I don't know if I can make the model do the thing I want when I start a company.
Can I just take one spin on that? The way that I typically think about it that may map to policy world is there's essentially 3 ingredients to good quality AI. It's compute, it's algorithms, and it's data. And in order for you to drive the creation of a high-end, state-of-the-art algorithm, model, you need those 3 ingredients. And if you think about how sort of like policy maps to those, it kind of makes a little sense, right? So if you're, let's say, trying to contain sort of the rise of the CCP and their ability to develop high quality models, you try to put a chokehold on certain like certain ingredients. And one of them could be compute and what NVIDIA is doing. Or in the world of data, there's been a lot of discussion about like, the public data that is scraped by these large language model builders. The reality today is there's pretty much no public data left for them to scrape. They scraped everything that's valuable. So now any kind of gains that you're seeing in these state-of-the-art models are developed by either data that is human generated or in some way synthetically generated to continue to power these models. So again, on the policy front, if you're looking at ingredients that feed into models, and things that you want to be evaluating, data is another sort of like cohort. And then the last piece is sort of the algorithm itself that is typically built by super smart people that are funded people like you or work at great state-of-the-art labs. So if you think of 3 ingredients, if you're trying to develop good AI, I always think of those 3.
Yeah, Michael, keep us on. We're going to take questions in just a minute, so get your questions ready. Michael, take us also, because you're spending a lot of time internationally, and also you see where a lot of the limits of AI people are hitting up against the limits with data, what is the notion of real data versus synthetic data and these things. So I'd love your perspective on what you see both internationally and as we are hitting some of the current limits of today on these dimensions of data.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say, I think what's very unique about this AI sort of wave is it's very different than some of the other big technology trends we've seen over the last 20 years. Kind of in the first internet boom of, let's say, the early 2000s, it was very dominated by US alone. And then you kind of like fast forward to the next wave where you saw a bunch of sort of social media rise and you saw a bunch of e-commerce, and China became a very clear sort of peer competitor with things like Alibaba and WeChat and so on. But what's very unique about sort of this third wave is it's like truly been internationalized. And if you even just look at the leaderboards of the state-of-the-art models, you have US models, you have French models, you have German models, you have Emirati models, you have Chinese models. And I think, if you kind of drill into that, it's like, why is that the case? It's like, how is it possible? And the reality is, it's like, it is hard to make these models, but it's not that hard. All you need is data, algorithms, and compute. And if you're able to pull all those 3 things together, you can train these models. So we're in kind of this sort of like geopolitical scenario where it's not just a technology that the US alone has, but it does control certain pieces of the supply chain which can limit the activities of some of our adversaries and others out there. What we are seeing is that generally the US-based frontier models are really, really good at English and it's sort of like not in Western knowledge. So the question becomes, if you want to sort of create a model which is relevant to your country, your people, your core culture, your language, your tradition, it opens up the question of how do you train it to do that? And it goes back again to that core ingredients question of how do you create the data sets which can map to the outcomes that you want to have? And if you think about sort of the publicly available data in the world today on the internet, the vast, vast majority is in English. That's like very unhelpful for a lot of countries in the global south and in other areas where they just don't have a very rich corpus of scrapable data or data that you can even convert into data that you could use to train a model. So if you think about it from sort of what actions are sort of CCP and CCP affiliated entities attempting to do globally, is they're attempting to be that link to sort of create a model that is bespoke to your country and your culture, and then you become beholden to the Chinese base model. And I think like that is sort of a geopolitical problem that I think the US is going to have to figure out what to do with, because our model developers themselves, there isn't a lot of revenue to be made if you're able to customize a model to a particular sort of obscure language in some sort of global south country. The Chinese are like willing to go do that because they see it for geopolitical reasons. They want their model placed there. So I think this is a battle that we're kind of going to see going forward, is how do you create the data sets which can allow for customizations in some of these on-the-fence countries.
Navina, why don't you take us home on this, which is specifically, how do you think about those organizations that are gas versus brake, if you will? I know that's an imperfect analogy because it's a little bit more of a dial. But if you think of gas versus the brake in the lens that you see from people, you're like, hey, responsibility. And they're like, hey, I just got to go out. I got to beat everybody else. I got to get all these small models, big models, open source models. I just got models everywhere. How do you manage through that? And what are you seeing that is helpful for everyone here to think about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. That's actually an interesting analogy, and I actually think about like brake actually becoming your competitive advantage now. So it's not about, if you think about, I don't know how many of you enjoy racing, I do. So if you actually have a really high performance car, it's not just how fast can you go from 0 to 60, it is how quickly can you stop so that you can prevent that accident and those unintended consequences. So one of the things that we are seeing emerge, whether it is in the startup ecosystem or the enterprise land, is how governance is actually becoming a competitive advantage. And I think there are a couple of nuggets that might be useful for the policy, folks to think about. Something we think a lot about on the National AI Advisory Commission that I sit on is, one, I think really aligning on what does good look like. Because to your point, when you are looking at these leaderboards, one of the key things that is missing is what are the core metrics we are trying to use to evaluate what is a good, specific AI, use case specific model really needs to do in terms of fairness or robustness or whatever metrics that you're trying to figure out. So I think there needs to be an alignment on what does that good look like, and I think policy has a really critical role to play in that conversation. Second thing, DJ, that we are seeing is harmonization of standards. And so whether it is, NIST risk management framework, or if you think about ISO coming out with 42001, which is very organizationally focused, but I think there's a lack of right now global standard harmonization, something that is being actively worked on. Because again, when you have these different and very powerful emergent properties of these frontier models, one of the core things when we start thinking about responsibility is, are we actually aligning to certain standards? That's going to become critical. And then the third thing that gets missed a lot in this risk-based approach or rights-based approach is context. The context of use of these artificial intelligence systems are so critical, and it's only within those contexts can you actually put the right guardrails. So as an example, when you're using one of these dual purpose models, they can be applied to marketing or customer support or risk management or whatever, but I think that context becomes really critical. So when we are having conversations at the global scale, whether it's with our allies or whether it's with global 2,000 companies, the conversation around really thinking through the context of use, because within that context of use is where you can actually put the right guardrails. So I would say those are the three areas that are becoming really critical as enterprises, but also as nations are thinking about where to invest their resources, whether it's in compute or whether it's in data or any sort of policy making that needs to happen.
So we've just scratched the surface. We haven't even really gotten into talking about geopolitical, China, India, other countries. We haven't talked about the areas where the greatest impact is. We'll touch a little bit on healthcare, obviously a huge amount to go there. There's a ton to talk about around small models, big models. But before we touch on those, we want to see if there are questions in the audience. Or we're just going to send this to ChatGPT for questions. I don't know. You guys get to pick. You're pickers. Here, we'll start here, and then you guys pick the rest.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate your perspectives. I think I'm curious to know from everyone's perspective on what's considered a good data set for you all to train technology on. And I think, as you were all talking about before, there is probably disagreement country to country, region to region, but I think that we also see disinformation, misinformation, disagreements across the political spectrum. So I wonder if that's going to affect what's considered a good data set, and then perhaps people will go to this AI system or another AI system. Thanks.
Good data. What is a good? What makes a good data set, or what makes a bad data set? Also, who would like to take that?
I can start. I think, again, for us, good data set really is around the context. So as an example, we work a lot in financial services, pharma, healthcare, et cetera. So within that, really having business context data that you can either fine-tune these large language models on or use RAG-based techniques to really figure out, are these systems going to deliver the ROI for me? So I would say good data for us is obviously focused on one context. The second characteristics we look for is compliance. So I think, as Michael was mentioning, like everything that we can scrape has already been scraped, but the question is that coming with consent? Is that coming with the right compliance guardrails? So for us, we focus a lot on what is compliant data and what does that really look like. And then the last thing I'll focus on is demographically diverse. Again, fairness is something we pay very close attention to in the systems that we are putting guardrails around. And it's very important that it's demographically diverse and representing the impacted communities or who it is planning to serve. So at least for me, I'll just start with those three. It's compliance, demographically diverse, and making sure that it's context specific.
And I would just double click on something you said that I think is so important, like for the enterprise space now, companies are using these models is exactly as you said, having the capability to, ground, the models in your own company data to make sure you're actually getting relevant, answers to what you're trying to do. And I think that's really core to making these tools useful for companies and businesses. And I think the key there is finding a secure way to do that, a way that they can trust how that data is being transferred and moved, that's not being shared around. And so that's something that we've really invested a lot in to help build that trust and increase that investment.
Yeah.
I was thinking about what Michael said earlier. The reasons, like at least somebody like me engages with policymakers much more over the last few years, I think range from obviously wanting to regulate against harms, wanting policymakers to understand the opportunity costs of like not seeing this innovation happen, right? Like everybody here has seen the chart or created the chart of healthcare and education costs going up inexorably versus every other industry. And like, we have a really large opportunity here. Then I think about national security and American competitiveness. But I think to Michael's point and responding to your question, the last thing I think about is American influence, right? And so, the internet is definitely not a perfect place. The English-speaking internet is not a perfect place. But I think most people would prefer that if there's going to be a set of base models, that base foundation models, that lots of other models are generated distilled from, fine-tuned on, we'd prefer, in this room that those models start with American and Western values, right? And so I think, there is a lot of work to be done in terms of guardrails, evaluations, like the types of capabilities that you designate as acceptable and work to be done with the labs on this. But I think a starting point of it is actually good for America, for the models that are the base for the rest of the models of the world to be American and mostly American in data, because most of the internet is still American. I'd like to make that claim.
Yeah, I would just agree with that. And I think working at a data company, I think that's a very, very hard question to answer because there's so many different types of data sets. Could use, I guess, zeroing in on one, which has become kind of a big part of training large language models, is a process called supervised fine-tuning. And that is where you create a data set that literally has prompt and response pairs for a set or a category of information that you want to improve model performance on. And while a lot of the discussion around data typically veers violently into, things about bias and all this kind of stuff. The reality is, a lot of if you want your model to be really good at coding, you need lots and lots of data on very high quality coding questions being answered extraordinarily correctly and with an extreme level of like detail and nuance. So a good quality data set in the world of coding is a bunch of prompt response pairs done multi-turn where someone is going back and forth in code to figure out kind of how to get the outcome that they want. So I think to me, I talk about sort of like, it's always like richness or high quality of the data itself, meaning is the data that you're inputting back into the model higher quality than what state of the art is spitting out on its own. So your benchmark is what is GPT-4 telling you, and is the data set that you're producing at a higher quality?
I'll just also emphasize that some of our best data sets haven't been created yet. Why don't we have more improvements on cancer? Because we have tons of cancer data, but it's split across thousands of databases that are in each of the hospital systems, and we don't have an incentive structure for people to actually share that data. We don't have a mechanism to do it. We have incredible proprietary data sets that are out there inside corporations that they haven't figured out how to even get good hygiene. And that is definitely true within the federal government. The federal government's data sets that exist today are some of the best data sets out there, and we haven't figured out how to actually get them into the hands of the public or those with the right usage and systems out there.
Not to double click on, just one quick, the thing that I think is so important about that question, relevant to a lot of policy questions, is you can have data itself, but there's this nuance around, we like to call it, is the data AI ready? Meaning, is it in a form that can actually train and improve an LLM?
Not PDFs.
Yes. Or you could sort of take data that you have at the federal level and convert it into sort of like SFT pairs and have prompt response pairs that then, if you're trying to get really high quality answers out of census data, just like, pointing a model at a bunch of spreadsheets related to the census isn't going to make a really good LLM about the census. You have to invest in creating high quality SFT data around these census questions. Sorry.
Maybe I'll just go on one tangent here because I think it's just interesting in terms of potential benefit. There are types of experimental data that would be really, really good for industry and therefore the American consumer to have, but are too expensive, right? And so like two domains that we have invested in recently or continue to do more investing in are pharma discovery and material science. Like these fields are ones where if you had unlimited experimentation capability, we would be further on drugs and carbon capture materials, for example, or batteries.
Can't get to fusion reactors without new materials.
Exactly. I think there's high demand for both of these things or both of these fields. And to some degree, both of these fields depend on very expensive brute force experimentation today, scientific intuition, which will continue to be important. And it is not that this next generation of models is going to magically solve how the world works anytime soon, but they can dramatically reduce the cost of experimentation in both of these fields and basically reduce the cost of data collection, right? And so I think that's like an interesting vector that's not talked about enough.
Let's get another question. I'm not picking, you guys are picking, because I'm not going to be the bad guy.
Hey there, I'm Bo Peter, work for Senator Chris Murphy, and thanks to all of you for speaking with us. I would like to hear just a bit more about specifically engagement between Silicon Valley and the Department of Defense. It sounds like, Michael, you have a background there. And obviously, there's a lot of history, but we'd just be interested to hear your thinking about where we are when it comes to new programs like the Defense Innovation Unit, Office of Strategic Capital, areas where there is opportunity for collaboration and research and development when it comes to AI, and also on the sort of acquisition side, where you see sort of the most promise to implement and use AI in safe and effective ways, and sort of main barriers to seeing that through.
Michael?
Yeah, I think there's generally been a significant amount of progress probably over the last decade or so. I think under the Obama administration, you started DIUX that converted into full DIU under the Trump administration and then got elevated to report to the DepSec under this administration. So the focus on these sort of like innovation hubs within the DoD has certainly increased. If you think about sort of like, the number of programs that, try to support the funding of sort of early stage Silicon Valley related defense tech has grown dramatically. I think, and that's improving. You're seeing like Replicator, for example, is a program that the Congress has funded, which has shown sort of great promise. So I think things are trending in the right direction. I think if you took the other side of the argument, you'd argue that although they are trending in absolute terms, all of this activity is a rounding error in the larger DoD budget. So if you're looking at $850, $900 billion a year, and everyone's cheerleading because Replicator's at $900 million, to buy some commercial drones, like that's not what's going to materially change our posture and our ability to project power in the Indo-Pacific. So I think there's a lot of excitement. If you're in the Silicon Valley world, a lot of people would say we may be in a defense sort of bubble, if you will, and a lot of investors who are investing in that space, continue to believe that at some point more than just one or maybe two Silicon Valley companies will ever get a program of record, and they're betting a lot of money that that's going to be the case. But at least as of now, I think I don't personally see that. So I think there's still a lot of opportunities to actually take real material bets, not like rebrand, SBIR money into an innovation program, but rather turn significant dollars on taking a risk on this stuff. And it's not going to work 100% of the time. But if you only want to invest in projects you think are going to work 100% of the time, you're going to build an F-35 for 15 years and have a program that's like an elephant in the room. So that's kind of my take. I'm optimistic about it because I've never seen more people excited in this part of the United States about defense tech in my lifetime. I'm not that old, but I still think it's like amazing to see. I'm flying down to El Segundo on Friday, meeting some folks down there. So there's a lot of excitement generally in this domain. But I think the Pentagon can do more than just more cyber stuff.
And if I may just add, so it's what has been interesting for us as an early stage startup to see is there's been more engagement with CDAO, DoD, especially around responsible innovation principles. So as someone brought up the question of value alignment, that's a hard problem, and values in DoDs could be very different than other agencies. So what we have seen is DoD, CDAO, DIU included. There's been a lot of active involvement with early stage startups like ours, not only to test out their responsible AI toolkits that was just released, but also to get feedback on are these principles actually going to be in alignment with some of the big programs that DoD is considering. So I would say that's been really heartening to see, like reaching out to early stage startups. And then the second thing that I've been really excited to see, especially on the discussion around FedRAMP process, right? We do understand that you can't just move at the government or DoD speed for some of these new AI capabilities, which are changing so drastically. So there's been an active discussion around how do you actually think about acquisition of third-party commercial AI systems, and does the FedRAMP process actually work, or is there a way that we could create some shortcuts, especially for Gen AI capabilities that DoD and others should be adopting? So I would say those are really two heartening signals between DC and Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I'll just start a couple things since late Secretary of Defense Ash Carter tasked me with rebooting Defense Innovation Unit. And then, as Michael pointed out, it got elevated during the Trump administration and carried forward. And then also the creation of Defense Digital Service. Biggest things that we're finding out, still need a culture of software. We have a culture of building physical. We haven't gotten that idea of what developing software is like. What is the creation of data sets? What is the effort? We don't have the procurement classic issues there. Is it getting better? Absolutely. Is DoD fragmentation of small dollars, lots of different places, strategic capital? It's all over the place, and so we don't have it focused. And then I am co-chairing the task force on Gen AI for the Secretary of Defense, and so our report will come out later, and Congress will have access to that hopefully towards the end of this year. But trending positive in a lot of good area, but a lot to be done. Who do we want to go to? All right, we'll go here and then here. And wait, because we only have 5 minutes. All right, I'm being warned.
Okay. Obviously, our conversations are pretty much around U.S. laws that would, be regarding AI, but I'd kind of like to zoom out a little bit and ask your thoughts on what you would think about a possible international AI policy. I'm thinking kind of parallel to like international space policy. Would this be effective, beneficial, realistic?
Like treaties-esque?
Yeah,
Is that what
for like an agreement, like international agreement between countries on how to handle AI as a tool, as a resource, whatever.
Right, okay. Can we also get your question? And so then we'll have people kind of dual track the questions here.
Sure. So I work on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, so typically oversight of the State Department and USAID. We had a chance to talk with James Manyika yesterday, and I was particularly interested in his role as the co-chair of the UN High-Level Advisory Board on AI. And we talked a little bit about things that are going on within the UN body about addressing the concerns coming from a lot of global South countries, Latin America and Africa, what you just alluded to. And I'm particularly interested in how we're thinking about addressing a lot of these concerns, understanding that building domestic LLMs, frontier models, is not feasible for many of these countries. And at some point, they're going to need support from industry outside, and hopefully that would be from the United States and not the PRC. So, I mean, at least I believe it would be in our interest. I would rather avoid us not being asleep at the wheel again and find ourselves in another Huawei situation. Given that business has such a huge role here, I guess I'd be curious to know, what type of collaboration may be happening right now between the U.S. government and the private sector on this issue. Maybe not so much at all, but I'd be curious to hear your perspective. And what is private industry looking to see from the U.S. government in terms of coordinating these efforts globally? What role do they feel like the U.S. government should be playing in order to really mobilize, I guess, the private industry here to meet those needs?
Great. So perfect pairing of questions to take us home. And why don't we just go actually, Narina, we'll come from this side over this way this time. Take us home with how to think about this from the international perspective, partnerships, treaties, allies. How do we put more water in the harbor to float all boats with countries that may not have the resources?
Yeah. So let's start with policy harmonization and standards harmonization. There's an active body of work right now that is trying to bring all that together, whether it is with the EU AI Act or what's happening with Singapore AI model governance or what's happening in the United States. Is there going to be a global body that has a set of rules and guardrails? I think there's an aspiration, very complex problem. Because again, if you think about what is the biggest challenge, it's value alignment. Every company has its own set of values or own set of criteria. But there is certainly an aspiration, especially starting with standards. Can we actually have a global organization that can come up with harmonized standards? Very difficult to have that, I would say, in the time frame that we are looking at. To the second question that you posed, I think there's a massive need for public-private partnership, especially because if you look at who right now has the compute resources and the capital, it's Global South is really struggling. And so we are right now having a lot of conversations, whether it's with LATAM or with some of the other countries, not only around data, like can we actually collect data which is conducive to their regions, but also is there a way that we can share compute resources to help them build their AI capabilities? But lastly, to underscore, AI literacy is a massive problem. And we work a lot with Global South right now, and the conversation we are having right now, they're not having those conversations. So I think there's a big focus needed for AI literacy as well, beyond the technical capabilities on compute and data that needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
I think on the more global AI rules, I think the challenge you face there is, or we face collectively as a world, is that we have an adversary in the PRC, which no matter what they claim they agree to, they will flagrantly violate and throw it in our face. So I think, and outside of them, if other people are following our quote rules, it doesn't really matter. So I'm not saying it's a fool's errand. I think I sat on many G7 and G20 ministerials where we agreed on principles and everybody, pat each other on the back for that. But I think it's very, very tricky. I think to your question, that's something that I deeply think about, and I think there's a huge opportunity for, in some ways even for Congress to be very helpful here. And where I see a massive opportunity is in flexing the muscle of existing U.S. development finance to tackle this issue. We have organizations with insanely large balance sheets that are charged with supporting U.S. interests abroad, places like DFC, EXIM, USAID. The way that those organizations are structured and the rules they have in place and the way that they can deploy dollars make it, and I've experienced this as I've tried to talk to them, really hard for them to support software. If you want them to build a pipeline, they know how to do that. They've done that deal 10 times and they will know how to finance it. If you tell them we need to figure out how to export U.S. software, it's just this confusion. And maybe it's part of the industry needs to be better at that. But the reality is we have the best algorithms, we have the best chips, we have the best data developers in the world. We should be creating packages that are supported by XM and DFC to go out there and make a difference in these countries in the global south and provide sort of a US suite of AI suite that can solve the biggest problem they have. The other thing to think about, which is where we have a bit of an advantage, is in some ways AI as sort of this new level of LLMs is an API-driven technology. So what we can support them in doing is developing the data sets that then we can use to build fine-tuned versions of our best-in-class US models and give them access to those APIs. And I think that's something that is a lot less expensive than trying to build massive NVIDIA racks everywhere around the world. So I think we have a structural advantage. We just have to reorient and deploy our development finance agencies to what I think is a massive, massive problem.
Sarah?
It is not economically rational to expect that countries in the global south will pre-train foundation models at the scale that our largest labs are today, right? Because that is very quickly becoming a $5–10 billion plus CapEx problem in a single go. That being said, as Michael pointed, and that will continue to progress, who knows for how long, but like people are funding it, right? As Michael said, I think the case in which many countries are fine-tuning models built in Western civilizations is very good for the United States. And one of the biggest things that I think lawmakers can do is not regulate open source model use and progression. Because this is actually like one thing that's dramatically changed. I should have said this at the very beginning, but something that has dramatically changed from the beginning of 2023 till now is the foundation model environment is now very competitive, right? Like in the top 5, you have Llama and Mistral. And so you can have...
And China.
Sorry?
And China's model.
And China, like DeepSeek is in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so like if it doesn't happen here, it will happen other places too. But you can have frontier capabilities for free, right? And the cost to go from that to something that works on a different language and a different culture with all of the reasoning that is already global is, many magnitudes smaller, and requires less and less expertise as the ecosystem evolves. And so I think thinking of that as an opportunity for lawmakers is an interesting one.
Yeah, and then going last, attempting not to be repetitive, but just to, for the global standards, just to state the obvious, for companies, it's beneficial to have a consistent set of standards, right? A consistent set of rules and guidelines. But again, there's some practical elements. But I do think there's value in what we've been seeing as sort of values-aligned countries coming and saying, hey, these are our standards. This is how we are going to approach this. But any type of standards and frameworks, again, I hope they also differentiate between the different players in the AI ecosystem and life cycle. The developers need a different set of standards and rules and expectations than the deployers, than the end users. And then we think about bigger questions around sustainability and rights. Anyway, there's a lot of questions there, but just to say, yes, it would be ideal, but again, there's some practical elements there. And then in the developing world, again, trying not to be repetitive, I think the open source point is a really interesting one about sort of how that sort of opens it up. I think the other piece, stating the obvious just from a development standpoint, there's a lot of infrastructure problems in certain areas that are really prohibitive too before we even get to the point of countries developing their own models. So we think about, again, the electricity required, sort of the infrastructure there, require the upskilling pieces as well in some instances. But yeah, I think there is some potential, and I think as there's also market incentives as well that needs to be there as well for companies.
So we're actually over time, but I have one question, and Daniel doesn't have the ability to turn off my mic, so I'm still going to ask it. So to this audience, as well as everyone that's listening online, what's your advice to them to listen, watch, read, to stay on top of this space? Rachel?
I was just reading or listening to the AI Breakdown as sort of my daily, sort of get the 15 minutes of the latest news in AI. So that's my go-to.
AI Breakdown, how do people find it?
I use Spotify. I think it's on most platforms for AI news.
You gotta.
Oh, no.
Come on.
Okay, I co-host a podcast with a friend who's another tech investor. It's called No Priors. We talk to a whole range of different people from, Jensen Huang to Kevin Scott, the CTO of Microsoft, to, leading researchers. And it's somewhat technical, but we try to get a range of perspectives from the frontier.
So that's yours. What else do you follow?
I don't know what our portfolio companies tell us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the content stream is pretty difficult to
Pretty tough.
absorb. Yeah.
Okay. Michael?
I would listen to Sarah's podcast, obviously, and
We've had Alex from Scale.
yes,
Yeah.
and I would also read the latest from HAI. They just put out really great research, don't they?
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah. Navrina?
+1 to HAI. I think also the AI report, annual AI report AI index is amazing.
Yeah,
If you haven't read this year's. One of my favorites is Jack Clark's newsletter. For those who don't know, he is one of the co-founders of Anthropic. I think Import is one of the most fascinating newsletters, as well as Dr. Andrew Ng's Batch. And for those who care about governance and care about policy making, certainly Credo AI, we have a monthly newsletter, which I think really tackles this oversight deficit between tech innovation and policy and how you can sort of circumvent that.
Daniel is very thankful that he didn't cut off my mic because we gave so much shout outs to HAI. I'll just mention one real quick for those that are interested in national security. Raj Shah and Chris Kirchhoff just have their new book on DIU out that gives a lot of the insights as well. Please thank me, not thank me.
Thank you, DJ. Yeah.
Talk about there's your hallucination for you for the morning or the evening. But please thank the panel. There we go. Thank Rachel, Sarah, Michael, and Navrina for being here. And thank you for all being here and joining us online.